An unresolved debt crisis in the Eurozone, spluttering revolution in the Middle East, signs of a possible recovery in the US economy. There's certainly no lack of burning topics for the icy slopes at this year's meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The FT will be there, bringing you the latest contemplations and considerations from the world's political and business elite. But before we go, I'm joined here in our London studio by three experienced Davos attendees to give us a quick run-through of what they think is going to shape the debate in the Swiss mountains. They are Patrick Jenkins, our banking editor, Chris Giles, economics editor, and Gideon Rachman, our chief foreign affairs commentator. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. Patrick, I'm going to start with you. Banking obviously was a big topic of discussion at last year's Davos. Are you expecting something similar this year? Are the bankers going to be in the limelight again?
They are. There's going to be a lot of them there again. Interestingly, we're not going to get some of the new generation of bankers. We've had handing over the batons at a lot of banks, particularly in Europe. And interestingly, quite a few of those new chief executives say, this is a forum for the old guys, not for us. We've got stuff to fix in our banks back home, so they're not going. Well, we're still getting a lot of big names there. And I think for them, the overall overriding agenda that they will be talking about is the regulatory picture. Still uncertain in terms of the Basel III agenda, still things to debate there. That'll be a big topic.
Capital requirements, etc.
Capital requirements, particularly with relation to the European requirements by next June, or by this June, they're going to have to hit new 9% capital ratios. And I think that's going to dominate a lot of people's thinking. Then the other thing that obviously is going to dominate is the continuing crisis centred on Europe in particular. And I think they're going to be putting a lot of pressure. The bankers are going to be putting a lot of pressure in rhetoric, certainly, in other ways I don't know, on the politicians to try and fix things.
Well, yes, exactly. So, I mean, it is all about the Eurozone, is it not, Chris?
It is, pretty much. If you had to take one issue for the World Economic Forum, well, the one issue that everyone wants to be sorted is the Eurozone, because if that blows, and it could, then that can bring down both the banks and various bits of geopolitics. So the Eurozone is going to be huge. We normally get a very large contingent of European leaders, in fact, but this is just a continuation, just another summit in the sort of end of almost 2 weekly summits we've been having for the past half year. I don't expect any resolution to happen at Davos, but there should be quite a lot of news. And I think particularly when all the leaders, Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy came last year and said, absolutely, we will save the euro, the political will is there, and then proceeded through the year to show that it wasn't entirely there. It will be very interesting to see exactly what the tone is this year.
I mean, Gideon, is it going to be all European woes? I mean, let's not forget this has been the year of the Arab Spring, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of Eurozone woes because this is, after all, the World Economic Forum. But firstly, it's not all Europeans there. There are always big delegations from India, China, the States, and so on, and they'll have their own concerns. And also politics and geopolitics does play a big part. The Arab Spring was playing in the background, if you like, at the last World Economic Forum, and was a kind of a good reminder that despite this being the global elite, they were as blindsided as the rest of us by it. People didn't really see it coming. Then now, a year later, people will be assessing what that means. There'll also, I think, be quite a lot of concern about a looming crisis with Iran, the suggestion of an oil embargo and whether the Iranians will react aggressively to that and how that might escalate. And also concern about a whole raft of elections across the world in the next 12 months, from Russia to France to the United States.
And of course, I mean, elections in the US, everyone's got their eye on the US, but does this mean that we're going to have much of a US contingent? Are the Americans going to have their minds on other things?
Well, actually, there hasn't been that much of an official government contingent for some years now, really since the Obama administration came in. In the first few months of the Obama administration, they were preoccupied with bailouts and really the aftermath of the Lehman Brothers fallout. Now you get their top economic people like Tim Geithner show up. But the foreign policy people, not so much. And I think that's partly because they're busy, but also partly because I think in terms of atmospherics, Obama, after all, is going to campaign as the champion of the little guy, of the 99% against the 1%. And Davos is very much an event where the 1% gather. And I don't think he necessarily wants to have his top people on the ski slopes with them.
US economy, obviously, Chris, everyone's watching it. Glimmers of hope. Is this sustainable? Is it going to offer any sort of optimistic angles on the conference?
Well, I think we should look a little bit away from the Eurozone, because the world economy in the last few years has actually done rather well. So it's not just the US where we are seeing some green shoots, some glimmers, and certainly quite a strong fourth quarter of last year, 2011. But also emerging markets which have been doing very well, and I will be there being confident again. China, India will be saying, well, you know, the Eurozone might be in trouble, but our economies are still growing rapidly. For the US, I think, unfortunately, it would be nice if Tim Geithner could be there and say, we're going to do fine, whatever happens in Europe, but he's got a bit more sense, and his rhetoric throughout the whole of last year was the world economy depends on Europe sorting out its mess, and so he'll be there beating that drum, I'm sure, again.
Yes, and despite green shoots as well, I mean, we're still facing problems in the banking sector, and there could be any number of throw-ups from that will tip the whole thing on its head.
Absolutely. The other perspective that the banks will have on this and their investors is from the bondholder side, where sharing in the woes of troubled sovereign states like Greece, the so-called private sector involvement there, is going to be a huge topic. How that gets played out in future, you know, what confidence can bondholders have in sovereign debt in the future?
So in some ways it's kind of coming at a very opportune time. Well, all of you, thank you very much indeed. We'll look forward to hearing from you on the slopes. So volatility, uncertainty, likely themes for Davos in 2012. We'll be there to see if there are any optimistic voices, and I hope you'll join us online where you can read and watch further coverage at ft.com/Davos.